Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Eleanor Page here at the Children's Book Author Podcast. Welcome back to the show. It's now 2023 and a whole new beginning awaits. I'm going to just allow this year to unfold the way that it unfolds and just keep plugging away at the things that feel good, that help other people. So hopefully lots of wonderful writing in the children book area, continuing on with the podcast. I'm looking forward to creating the middle grade author blueprint course, which I've had on my heart waiting for a very long time. In fact, it was going to be the children's book author blueprint, and then I got some feedback from Instagram and the wonderful authors on there. You can follow me at Eleanor Page Books, by the way, and we can connect there more regularly. I got some feedback that actually, it's middle grade that doesn't really have a lot of marketing, writing advice. A lot of the things for children's books are aimed at picture book writers. Love picture books, but my heart is really with chapter books and middle grade, which I know in different countries we can refer to them in different ways. I believe in Australia we kind of differentiate between what's called junior fiction, which is equivalent to sort of chapter books in the USA, and then middle grade novels. But often people that I talk to in the USA, and you might have a different opinion to this, it's just what I've understood so far, is that middle grade can encapsulate that junior fiction chapter books and also the novels. And it's quite a big age range, but I tend to sort of think it's 8 to 14-year-olds. And I like to include the 13 and 14-year-olds because they're like the forgotten ages. And perhaps that's because kids stop reading at that age. But I imagine there's a lot of kids that don't stop reading at that age. That's the target group. It's 8 to 14-year-olds in my mind. You can go a little bit younger with that, 7-year-olds. Suppose you could go a bit older with that. 15-year-olds, it doesn't matter. There's lots of overlap and lots of breaking the rules, which is always a good thing, I think. Today's show, you're going to love it. And why do I say this? Well, first of all, it is such an important part of marketing your book, the blurb. The blurb is the description that you're going to put on your sales page, and it could also go at the back of your book. But the blurb is really a sales copy. It's a piece of copy, piece of writing that helps to sell your book. And it's the only thing the reader has other than seeing the front cover. The next thing they're going to look at is that blurb. Who are the characters? What's this about? Will I like to read this? And if it's something that hooks them, then they'll buy the book. That's where we want them to go. Or at least if it's free, they'll download it and read the book. We talk a lot about how to market our books, but I think sometimes we forget that the basics matter the most. The first one is write a good book. The second one is have a great cover, because people do judge the books by your cover. But the third one is that book blurb. I was so lucky to have discovered Jessie Cunniffe on Instagram from Book Blurb Magic, and you can go look her up at bookblurbmagic.com. She just knows everything about writing a book blurb that helps readers to click that buy button, because we can write book blurbs, but if it's not enticing to the reader, then we've lost that opportunity. And the best part about writing blurbs is it's a really easy, cheap way to completely change the sales of your books. because it doesn't require money like advertising does. Recovering your books can cost a lot. I've done a few courses now where the advice has been one of the first things you should start experimenting with is the blurb. So, Jessie, you're going to love this interview. Jessie's going to give you all the bits and pieces that you need to write a great blurb. And she also writes them for you. So if you don't want to write the blurb, you can go and book in for her to write it for you. And Jessie, so dedicated to helping the author community, has created a course so that you can write your blurb the right way. So I have 25 books now. I think it's 25. I'd love to hire her to do all of them. Perhaps I will, the most important ones at some point. But buying the course, which, can I say, is like, do not hesitate. It is actually so affordable at, I believe the last time I looked at it, $37. Like, what is that? Seriously, I would have bought it if it was $250. Sorry, Jessie. I really would have, because now I can write all my blurbs forever using that fantastic formula. But that's not all, people. The best bit is you will hear in the end of the interview that if you use the code Eleanor Page, you will get a 5% discount on any of the services and the course. But since that time, Jessie's changed it to 10% discount. So jump on that. It's Eleanor Page as your discount code, and you get 10% off, which is amazing. And actually, I got the percent off too by using my own code, which you'll also hear in the interview. Also, a special note. There was a lot of technical difficulties when I was recording this interview with Jessie, and we had to start certain bits again. And I have a feeling that I may have lost part of her answer when we talk about first person point of view on a blurb. So I think from what we did capture, it made it sound like definitely don't do it, which isn't actually the case. Yes, there's some cautions. Don't just do it because the way you've necessarily written your book. So I believe Jessie's advice around point of view for your blurb is to look around the market and see who you wish to position yourself alongside. If, for example, you wanted to attract a similar reader to another author who's doing really well using first-person point of view, then it's probably a smart move to write your blurbs in first person. So find out what's working for other people that you think your book and your style is similar to. And I do believe that is the right answer. But, of course, you can always reach out to Jessie at Book Blurb Magic and get her to check your first-person point of view blurbs if you already have one of those. I, as I mentioned in the interview, use first-person point of view on all of my Evie Everyday Witch series, and I find that works really well for me. I won't be changing them. I think it gives a really good feel of what you're going to get when you read my books in that series, but then I don't use first-person in any of my middle-grade novels because those books are all third-person, and it just doesn't lend itself to it, in my opinion. So there is no fast and hard rule on that. And I just wanted to give that information because, as I said, I do have a feeling that we lost a little bit of her answer to that question in the interview. Enjoy the interview. Have a wonderful year ahead. I look forward to bringing you lots of exciting interviews this year that help you become the children's book author of your dreams. Welcome back. Today I have an amazing guest. Of course, all my guests are incredible or I wouldn't have invited them onto the show. And today is no exception. I'm pleased to introduce to you Jessie Cunniffe, who is a professional blurb writer. Yes, we need one of those so badly. And book blurb coach, even better. She can coach you to write your own book blurb eventually one day, maybe. Welcome to the show, Jessie.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. What a lovely introduction. I do love the enthusiasm in your voice when you say blurb writer, because I had no idea what I was getting in for when I started writing blurbs. It happened very accidentally. Back in 2020, I was still teaching in high school. If you've been around my socials for a while, you know I'm a high school music teacher who has always done writing and editing and everything on the side. And then I decided I wanted to do more writing. So I had a day off all through 2020 and I was like, I'll do more writing. And I literally had just self-published my own book on piano teaching. That's what I do. And I wrote the blurb, and it was kind of for me, it was a bit of a non-event. I was like, okay, cool. This is just a big experiment. And then when I had this spare time to write more, I was like, I'll just write something really short. I wonder if people would pay me to write their book blurbs. And I genuinely, hand on heart, thought that no one would pay me to write their blurb, because I was like, they're so short. Like, come on, authors. I'm so in awe of authors. I'm like, they've written a whole book. Like, they're not going to want me to write 150 words for the back cover. And so I jumped on Fiverr and I put up a gig, and I think I charged about $15 for blurbs back in the day. And it kind of exploded. So I had a couple of 5-star reviews, and then Fiverr featured me. And then I got my own mentor on there, and they promoted me. And I was writing blurbs at all hours of the day and night. Like, I was still working 4 days a week as a teacher. And then I was up until midnight writing multiple blurbs for people. And I was one of the top selling blurb gigs on Fiverr for the whole, I think it was about 8 months that I did it intensively. And in that time, I wrote so many blurbs for so many genres, like literally hundreds of clients. And what shocked me was this huge outpouring of, oh my God, we hate writing blurbs so much. You're a lifesaver, or you're the 5th blurb writer I've used. Thank you so much for getting it right. Like, there was just this anguish and angst around blurbs that I had. Like, I laugh about it now because I just had zero idea this was something that authors struggled with. And I got to the end of 2020. I had written a ridiculous number of blurbs, and I was like, I don't want to just kind of drop this, but it's not sustainable. And I was going back to full-time teaching in 2021. And so I was like, I wonder if I could teach people how to write their own blurbs. And that is how Book Blurb Magic came about. I designed a little course and recorded it in my apartment. And for several months, nothing happened. And I was certain that I was a massive idiot who, was just overly zealous. And I was like, the reason people are paying me to write blurbs is they don't want to write it themselves. And then things took off on Instagram, and I started getting insane testimonials, and people, more importantly than that to me, people started sending me the blurbs that they wrote after using the course. And I was like, oh my goodness, I did it. It works. The blurbs they're writing are awesome. And, having been a teacher for my whole entire life, that is just the biggest kick to get people coming back and going, this is what I've done with what you taught me. And, so proud of my students. But things kind of escalated so much that now I don't do very much teaching at high school at all. I spend most of my time writing blurbs again and selling the courses. And I've made a course for romance authors, because that's a huge sector of the self-publishing industry. And I spend lots of times on podcasts like this because I love talking about blurbs, and I'm so passionate about helping authors to kind of like demystify this whole process. And whether you want to write it yourself or whether you want me to write it for you, I just really want to bust all the myths around blurbs and make this process as painless as possible.
Wow. There was so much in there. Like, I need to ask you about 50 follow-up questions. So let's start with the first thing that pops into my head is, how did you work out how to do it in the first place? Like, did you just go and study like how other people did it? Like, what did it just come naturally to you? Is it just something that you're just, your brain works in blurb? Because blurb is like a thing. It's not
it
like
is.
A lot of writers write their blurb the way they write their book, and that's sort of one of the big mistakes. So can you talk a bit to that topic?
Absolutely. I have always been obsessed with short form writing. So I worked as a music critic for 10 years and for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, actually. And they are, very, very tight word limits. When I started, we had 100 words to write about an entire album. We eventually got bumped up to 200 words, but I also had another gig with a different magazine that only gave me 75 words. So I have been obsessed for a very long time about with distilling the essence of an art form, whether that be music or a book, into as few words as possible. And some people think I'm just a glutton for punishment, but I find that so satisfying. And it's just something that I think it's so rewarding to be able to do. Definitely my BBM students have come back to me and gone, oh, I did it. Like, it's so satisfying. So I have a long history of writing things in short form. When it came to blurbs, I think it was just that I had read so many. This might sound, I don't know, ridiculous, but I sort of didn't have to think too hard about how to write one. I was just like, this is the book, this is what needs to be in there. But I have always been the kind of writer who absorbs, I suppose, different styles. And if I've read a lot, like when I was a kid, I was obsessed with journalism, and I ended up writing for a paper. So I would kind of try and absorb every style that I could. And I think it was just that I'd read so many blurbs. Certainly, looking back at my archives, were they the best blurbs I have written? Can I write better blurbs now? Absolutely. It's not like I started writing blurbs that were absolutely phenomenal straight up. My customers were very happy, but I was writing for a wide range of people with a wide range of needs and expectations. I certainly have much higher expectations of myself now, and have learned so much. So it's definitely been a process. But what I did notice as I was writing these hundreds and hundreds of blurbs is that I started doing the same things over and over again. And that didn't mean that the blurbs were all sounding the same, but it did mean that there was a formula. And I sort of did things backwards, because I sat down when I was, designing book blurb magic, and I was like, went through exactly what I do. And then I went, I wonder if other blurbs do that. I should probably check. And when I went back and checked blurbs of every genre on my bookshelf, they were doing the exact same things. So I didn't invent this. I'd clearly absorbed it from all of the blurbs that I've been reading, but it kind of blew my mind, because I went, oh my goodness, there is a formula. There is like that little structure in there that even though all these blurbs are sounding really different, they're all doing the exact same things. And I found that really exciting. And that's now what I teach and what I ended up doing. So it was a big accidental learning curve, I think.
Yeah, so there's part intuition, part, as you say, kind of studying it, and then I'm assuming probably when you put it on Fiverr, you're thinking, oh, whatever. But as soon as people started coming in, you're like, I've got to do this thing properly, and then you would have just improved dramatically.
Yeah, and also just there's such a difference between different genres as well. And sometimes a genre would knock me for six, and I go, oh my goodness, I still remember getting my first children's picture book blurb and being like, what do I do? Because they're a whole other ball game to chapter books. And luckily authors are really, really nice people to work with. I've had very, very few. I think I've only had one or two that had interactions with authors in 2.5 years of doing this. And they're collaborative, and they're quick to be like, this works or this doesn't work, or I feel like it needs to be this. And they helped me to learn. They helped me to learn exactly what I do today.
But as you say, and that was the key word you said there a moment ago, you said there's a formula.
Yes.
There's a formula. It's not just chuck up this kind of summary of your book, which do a lot of people kind of think of a blurb as a summary? And
yes.
Is it that?
No. And that's actually I often get asked, what's the number one mistake people make when writing a blurb? It's that. It's thinking of it as a summary. So a summary, and I kind of, for your viewers who are watching the video of this, a summary is kind of like this, right? It squishes everything in. With a blurb, we actually need to start here and work outwards. So you find the essence.
I have to stop you. For the people that couldn't see, for the people that are listening, you started with your hands out. Yep. Saying most people, start there and go
squish in.
And you say start with your hands together and move them out. That is so freaking powerful. Keep going. Sorry for interrupting.
That's fine. It tends to be a light bulb moment for people, and it's something that's really small and really simple, but it can cause an enormous shift in how you're approaching the blurb. Because I tell you what, one thing I hated doing in school was summarizing, and I love writing blurbs. So those two things can't be the same, because I know I hate one of those things. And it's one reason why I don't write, book synopsis, for example. It's just not my thing. I don't love that. So the key difference here is that a summary is trying to fit, lots of details in a chronological order, including spoilers, giving you a complete overview. It's like if you read a synopsis on Wikipedia of a movie, you get all the spoilers. It's everything. And so that is not what a book blurb's job is. Obviously, we don't want to give away spoilers, but then what people tend to do is they write a summary and just leave out the spoilers. They're like, I'll just write this much and then leave out the spoilers. And what we get then is this weird like chronological thing that doesn't build up to anything, drops off, leaves us hanging in the worst way. We don't care. And it just has no punch. So a book blurb is a piece of sales copy. And a good thing to think about when approaching a blurb is that it is going to have a different beginning, middle, and end to that of your story. So if you were to write your story out in chronological order, which you just did, that's maybe not my brightest sentence, then you write your blurb, it has a different order because you're not going to start at chapter 1 and work your way through to the spoilers. It just doesn't work. So we want to throw out this idea of summary. Now, it does still require you to pick out the essential elements of your story and to decide what does or doesn't make it in. So if you want to be really nitpicky, maybe that's a form of summarizing. I have an exercise in the Book Blurb Magic course, which takes 10 minutes. I make you set a timer and it takes you through exactly how to choose what should go into your book blurb, because that is something that I wanted to make sure the course did, by the way, was actually allow authors to step outside of their work and figure out what needs to go into the blurb, because I'm already outside of the work when I write a blurb, but you as the author are inside it. So if you're writing your own blurb, that is something that we look at in the course because it's very important to be able to do that. But once you throw this summary thinking out of your head, I feel it opens things up a lot more and you're not kind of locked into, well, I have to fit every single detail in. You're kind of free to go, well, what's the one thing they need to know? And then what are the 2 or 3 other things they need to know to build that up? And once we start small and build out, that is way less overwhelming. I was always that person who wrote my essays, all the way up to the word limit and then stopped. I wasn't the person who wrote like 3,000 words and then was like, oh, I've got to chuck 1,000 words out. I'd always start small and build out. And I just think that's completely different, I think, from the way a lot of people write books, because a book is just such an enormous project. You can't be that, let's say, precise when you're first drafting a book. And so lots of us, when we write books, are in that mentality of throw everything and see what sticks, and you're going to edit it all down later on. And if that works for you for writing a blurb, I'm absolutely not going to say don't do it. We're all different. But I do generally find that trying to cut down a blurb is one of the most painful things you will ever do in your life. And it's better to start small and build up from there.
Great advice. And the word that pinged in my ear really loudly was, it's a piece of sales copy. Did that sound a bit scary? Yes, because now what you're talking about is you're no longer writing fiction or even non-fiction for that matter. You're now writing like copyright, and you're being a copywriter. You're actually writing something specifically to sell something. Yeah. You're not just writing it to make you feel good as the person who wrote the book. I think I often do that. I write my blurb and be like, oh, it's such a beautiful example of my writing ability. Not really, but it's a sales piece. It's a piece of sales. So tell me more.
Yeah. Okay. So this is an interesting thing. It is a piece of sales copy, but I don't want that to make you feel like you have to take off your author hat and no longer be a fiction author when you're writing your blurb. I actually think being an author is a great strength in terms of writing your blurb. We're just not often taught how to use it. And I had a bit of a rant about this on Instagram about a month ago because I heard someone in the blurb writing sphere, and yes, there is a blurb writing sphere, believe it or not, say that you have to think like a reader, not like an author when you write your blurb. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because you wouldn't tell a musician to, think like the audience, not like a guitarist. Like, that's just ridiculous. You are an author. You can't stop being an author just to write your blurb. And I think that's a really unhelpful. I sort of see the intention behind that advice, but I generally think it is unhelpful and a bit intimidating, uncomfortable for a lot of authors to think, well, okay, I've got to just stop being an author while I write this blurb. How do I do that? So when we think about sales copy, I don't want you to suddenly go, oh, I have to write like a marketer. the most important thing about thinking about it as a piece of sales copy is understanding its purpose. So the purpose of your book is to walk a person through your plot so they understand everything, and when you get to the climax, all of those pieces can fall into place for them. The purpose of your blurb is to get someone interested enough in your story to want to find out what happens and need to read your book. But it's also to attract the right readers to your book. So you want a blurb that actually captures the same vibe as your book, because somebody reading that will either go, yep, that's me, or no, it's not, and either buy your book or walk away. And the more ideal readers you get buying your book, the more of those readers you attract to your book with an authentic blurb, the more 5-star reviews you're likely to get, because they're your people. They're your people. They're gonna love what you do, right? And one of the biggest complaints I've actually gotten from people who've come to me, either from other blurb writers or from trying to write their blurb themselves, is they're like, the blurb just feels off. Like, it's a great blurb objectively, like it reads fine as a piece of sales copy, but it doesn't actually capture the feel of my book. And that's something that I'm really passionate about doing in my own work when I write blurbs for people, but also that authors are freed up to do when you're using the formula. Because when you're using the formula in Book Blurb Magic, you're not stressing about what goes where. You can just focus on how your book should feel and how to describe those things, because you know exactly what goes in there. So I think that is really key to remember, so we don't get caught up in being like, oh, I have to be a marketer. Or you don't have to be a marketer. Sure, it might help, but you don't have to be a marketer. You can still be an author. You can still be you in your blurb. And I think particularly in children's book blurbs, it's particularly important to have your actual author voice coming out in the blurb. And we might discuss a bit later, but especially in picture book blurbs, because you want to give them a little taster of that reading experience before they even get there. And that's really, you don't want your blurb to be, completely devoid of who you are as an author.
That is like really fantastic advice, especially as you said, you want to find your reader. So, like I remember reading somewhere that there's a distinction between marketing and selling. Selling is like you just trying to sell that book to anybody and everybody. Marketing is really finding the people who genuinely are a perfect fit for your product.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Would buy it, but you've got to actually offer it to them. So, but I'd never thought of that when it came to the blurb. You want the right reader, and so your voice still has to be in it. That is golden advice. And do you know, one time, I think my very first novel, my first middle grade novel, I was very nervous and I wanted it to be spectacular. So I, got the most expensive blurb writer there was, which I think, this is now maybe 4 years ago. It was maybe $250, which is, like a lot. Maybe it's not a lot. I don't know, but that's how much it was.
I charge $200, so yeah, it's a upper range. I'm kind of mid-range price at the moment.
Yeah, and he was supposed to be like the best of the best. So anyway, I got the blurb and I put it into an authors group and said, "Look at my spectacular blurb." It was really just to brag, and then everybody started attacking the blurb, and I don't know why I'm bringing this story up. Maybe you could talk to this experience.
I want to hear more.
Yeah, so I put it up and everyone started attacking the blurb. People started going, oh, yeah, I know who wrote this. And I'm like,
I think I know who wrote it as well.
What is happening here, right? Like, it was quite an off-putting experience. And I think
how interesting
is my trauma online. We're discussing my trauma now, Jessie. Let's see what you have to heal me with. I was very scared of blurbs after that, because I'm like, if I paid the best of the best to write a blurb, but it's not a good blurb, what do I do with the blurb? Do I change the blurb? Do I keep the blurb? So because so many things can be very subjective, how do I, and I can only talk for myself, how do I as an author sort of, let go of that angst and sort of trust my blurb writer?
I think I understand what might have happened there, which is that when you're purchasing a blurb from a bigger company, they're working with a team, you might get the same person, you might get different people. There's a slight loss of personal connection. And I'm a solopreneur. When you buy a blurb from me, it's me who talks to you, me who's writing your blurb, me who's running through the edits with you. And I think that personal connection is quite important, because I adjust what I'm doing for each client. So yes, I have a blurb formula. Yes, I stick to it a lot of the time, but I also know the rules well enough now to be able to break them when I know it's going to suit you and or your book. So there's this kind of this real uniqueness that comes out of each blurb. And what I have heard from people's experience with various other larger companies is that the blurb itself reads really like it's a killer piece of sales copy, if we come back to that, but it's missing the vibe or the essence of their book and what specifically might make their book unique. And I've also had some authors say, look, they clearly took my book and were like, this is the genre it's going to be marketed in, this is your target audience, we are marketing to that, we're going to make it sound all whiz bang. And that's not always the best thing. So I'm a big believer in when you actually, and it's one thing that I sort of think is a little bit different about Book Blurb Magic, I don't actually take you through too much reader avatar work, if you will. So I know that it's a big thing in, book marketing to know your ideal reader, know exactly who you're marketing to. And yes, I absolutely believe that's important. And especially for any social media work you're doing, you need to know who you're talking to. But with blurbs, I've always taken the stance, I suppose they'd call it attraction marketing. So I believe that if your blurb authentically represents your book and how it feels to read your book, you are going to attract the right people to read your book. So I don't set too much stock, I suppose, by looking at your market and being like, I'm going to put all, twist it to make it sound like it's this and really slick. I'm actually looking at what does your book feel like? What do your characters feel like? What does the conflict feel like? And I'm trying to get that vibe into the blurb so that readers read it and instantly recognize, oh, this is something I love. I love reading. And people will disagree with me on that. And if that, sounds like it's not for you, it's not for you. That's totally cool. But I know that my clients find it incredibly validating, whether they write the blurb themselves or whether I'm writing it for them, to get this blurb that just fits, that just feels like it is. And I mean, you hear stories about authors. I can't remember the name of this author now, but she hated her blurb so much that the publishers had written for her that she burned all her books. And she was like, no. And J.D. Salinger, obviously wrote Catcher in the Rye, refused to have blurbs on any of his books. And it's not something I noticed until I heard about it recently. I went, oh my God, yeah, none of his books have blurbs on the back to this day. Because he just was like, no, I hate them all. They don't capture the book. And obviously didn't want to write one himself. So it can feel really awful to put your book out there with a blurb that doesn't feel like it fits. And I really think then that the grave danger there is that you will then attract the wrong readers, and they might be readers who read your blurb and this is fantastic. And then they read your book and you're like, this is not what I signed up for. And we've all had that experience. I think we've all read a blurb and then read the book and gone, the what? That's not what I wanted. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad book, but it does mean that the reader didn't enjoy their experience because they didn't get what they paid for. And that, I think, is the number one most important thing your blurb can do, is advertise exactly what it is on the inside, because then you get the right readers.
Yeah, I'm really touched by, I can really, sense that word for me, your authenticity, that you want to capture that feel. And also, as you say, you as that solopreneur bring so much of your own heart and passion and the way you see the word and the way you see words, as you say.
Yeah.
You've got that ability to really hone in where I so appreciate that. I do actually, I must confess, feel quite healed after that answer, Jessie.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad.
And so let's talk a little bit, can you share what is some of that formula? Let's say it's a middle grade book, because I'm assuming, and you might want to talk to this later, that there might be a difference in how you write a blurb, say for a novel versus that picture book. But
Absolutely.
Let's start with that, chapter book, middle grade. Is that sort of the same kind of formula?
Yeah, so this is an important thing I'm going to point out. So the Book Blurb Magic course is specifically for sort of chapter books upwards. So it covers fiction and nonfiction, for those of you who write both. It doesn't specifically cover how to write picture book blurbs. We are going to talk about picture book blurbs in this episode, and I am planning to do a masterclass on it at some point, but I can't give you a date for that. So I just want to be upfront about that. If you are writing picture books, Book Blurb Magic, I believe it will absolutely help you, but it will not work walk you step by step through picture book blurbs exactly. But yes, chapter books I tend to follow more or less a 3 to 4 paragraph structure in my blurbs. So we start with a hook, which is a single sentence that is designed to create curiosity. It's your, stop the scroll moment. And the important thing about a hook is that it should be a little bit surprising or a little bit unexpected or a little bit funny, whatever a main kind of emotion in your book might be. And the hook's job is not to convey important information. So, because you also have to assume that a reader may actually skim past your hook. So an important thing when we're writing blurbs is to remember, if a reader reads all the way through your blurb, you're doing a great job, but often they won't. They'll skip, they'll jump paragraphs. So the hook should be a standalone. If the paragraph 1 of your blurb doesn't make sense unless they've read the hook, then you need to go and adjust that hook so that it is a complete on its own sentence. And like I say, its job is not to convey important information. It is to set the tone and sort of surprise and intrigue a reader. Paragraph 1 is our setup paragraph. So in this paragraph, you want to introduce the main character. A note on characters is you've got to be careful about how many names you introduce in a blurb. Names are a very... they take up a lot of cognitive function to kind of process, which sounds very patronizing, but actually it's just an information-heavy detail. So I don't like to introduce any more than one character per paragraph if you have more than one character to introduce, and certainly use no more than 3 names. The catch there is that names applies to place names as well. So in total, character names and place names, you don't want more than 3 together. Okay, so 2 characters, 1 place name, so on and so forth. Again, just because that's very sort of heavy detail for a reader to absorb. So paragraph 1, we introduce our main character and we want to let our reader know how they've ended up in the situation that they've ended up in. Okay, so, whether they've suddenly discovered they have magical powers on their 16th birthday or, they blew up something and such and such consequences happening. However they're starting the story, we need to know how they got there. This is particularly important if you are writing, doing quite a bit of world building and you have a fictional setting that needs a little bit of description. That also goes in that setup paragraph so we know where we are. Second paragraph tends to focus on the inciting incident or a secondary character. So if you need to introduce the companion, second paragraph is a great place to do it. And we want to then give the reader a little bit of information about so then what? Like then this big thing happens and they have to go on the quest, or then they discover this and, that means they have to do X, Y, Z. Okay, so that inciting incident needs to come in the second paragraph. And then third paragraph is where we raise the stakes. So in raising the stakes, we really need to know what the worst case scenario is, what is the most terrible thing that could happen. And it's a good idea when you're raising the stakes to have a combination of an emotional stake and what I sort of call a physical stake. So for example, if the hero is battling for their, country's freedom, the personal stake might be that they'll lose everyone they loved. And then the more physical one might be that the country is taken over by, the evil overlord, right? And life will never be the same. So if you can't fit both in, I always go for physical over emotional, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive in some ways, but readers don't care about your characters yet. And that sounds really harsh, but they don't care about them yet. They will love them, absolutely. But it's very difficult to get emotionally attached to a character or two in the space of 150 words, which is, by the way, roughly how long you want your book blurb to be. 200 is the upper limit. So we want to sort of focus on consequences that we could all imagine. We could all imagine our country being taken over by someone we're terrified of, or we could all imagine losing our, if it's magical powers, losing some kind of function that we're used to, or, something relatable and very concrete, I guess, is what is important when raising the stakes. And then if you are publishing your book online, as we all do, you're going to want to add a call to action at the bottom. If you're on Amazon, it's a good idea to put something like scroll up and click buy now. You can personalize it, to meet your characters today or whatever you want to say. But ideally, a reader has made it all the way through the blurb, so you don't want to just leave them with your high stakes. You want them to then go, oh, I have to click buy now. So bump them back up to the top of the page, propel them into action so they can actually purchase your book. So that is the, a big crash course in the formula. In Sidebook Blurb Magic, I go sentence by sentence, and I have a whole bunch of examples that are literally color-coded because I'm a nerd like that. And so you can see exactly what elements of the story they're including where. There's multiple examples. So you can really kind of absorb that formula. So that is perfect for chapter books and upwards. Picture books are a whole different ball game. But also similar, just to contradict myself. So with a picture book blurb, you've got significantly less words, but you've also got quite a different audience. So chapter books are much more likely to be picked up by the children who are going to be reading them, and therefore they are quite likely to be reading the blurb themselves. Picture books are most likely to be picked up by the adult who is going to purchase the book for the child. So we need a blurb that speaks to both the child and the adult who's purchasing. So we've got to think about what adults actually want out of a book for their child and make sure we can convey this. And there's a few different ways to do it. So I think there's I've probably nailed down a less hard and fast formula for children's picture books. Like I said, it's something I'm working on because there's a lot of variance and there's a few different ways we can do it. I trawled my archives the other night looking for examples, and I came across one that I wrote for a book called Eddie the Farting Pug, which is a hilarious rhyming book. And I wanted to use it as an example today because I think it's quite a fun one and it highlights a few of the points that I think are important to know. So if you've written a rhyming picture book like this one, it's a great idea to have a rhyming hook and to have a little bit of rhyme through the blurb. You can even, I've seen blurbs where they're entirely written in rhyme. You don't have to do that to yourself, but if you're on a roll, by all means keep going because that immerses our readers directly into the book and they know what the reading experience is going to be like. So for Eddie, his friend, I went with a rhyming hook, which was, I still can't quite believe what page to write this, but here we go. It goes, a fartastic adventure through the sky, Eddie and Corky are learning to fly. So that is pretty much exactly in the same meter as the book was written as well, which was important to capture that, but it's not a line from the book. Then we can follow a similar formula to what I just went through for chapter books. So first paragraph is still going to need to be a setup. So I introduce the character. In picture books, you can get away with introducing 2 characters, I think, in that first paragraph. They're very, very short paragraphs. I stick to 1 or 2 sentences per paragraph for a picture book blurb. Really, really, really condensed. So my first paragraph for this one goes, Eddie the pug loves napping, eating marshmallows, and exploring with his friend Corky the corgi. But all those things cause a most unfortunate side effect for Eddie. If he's excited, frightened, or even extra happy, out comes a fart, fast and snappy. So again, we've got rhyme coming back in there. That again, that's not a line from the book. So that one was sort of one that I was kind of like, right, we're going to try and capture the feel of the book again. But I'm also explaining to our audience why he's called Eddie the Farting Pug. Okay, we know why now. Second paragraph, we go for the inciting incident like we do with the chapter book. So again, quite short. This one is one slightly longish sentence. So I've gone with poor Corky suggests they go in search of fresh air, but when the friends encounter some hang gliders on the hillside, Eddie and Corky embark on a trip that takes them a little further from home than they'd planned. So they end up on hang gliders, having a great adventure, and that's on the cover as well. So we kind of have that connection. And the final paragraph, so if we go through this third paragraph kind of structure, I like to make it just one sentence. Again, we're keeping it. This blurb came out at 117 words, I think it is, the blurb proper. And there's a little section at the end, which I'm going to explain in a second. But the final line I went with was, at first things look like they're going to take a turn for the dangerous, but then Eddie's farts save the day in spectacular fashion. And what's important about that sum up is that you'll notice I haven't left it on a huge cliffhanger. So spoilers are not as big of an issue in children's picture books because the parent isn't like, oh my God, I must find out what happens to Eddie the Farting Pug. They actually want to know, is my child going to be reading a book with a happy ending, or, you know, what lesson are they going to learn from it? Is there a moral to this story? So I've hinted quite heavily at the fact that, yes, he saves the day. And the farts are heavily involved, obviously, and the parents can be like, great, my child's going to think that's hilarious. So we don't need to stress so much about raising the stakes as high in a picture book because of our audience. Now, I still write that part of the blurb proper with the child in mind, of course, because I want that to be able to be read aloud to them, which is why I've incorporated elements like the rhyme and used very kid-friendly language. It's very simple. It's written very similarly to the style of the book so that the parent can go, hey, you want to read this book? And read the little blurb to them, you know, in the library, in the bookstore, wherever. At the bottom of that, and this is optional, but I think it's quite helpful, I put a couple of sentences, usually in italics, so they're just kind of set apart, actually describing the book, and this is directed at the parent. So for this one, I've said a hilarious rhyming picture book that will have kids and adults giggling at Eddie's windy adventures with delightful illustrations on every page. This fart-filled tale is sure to become a beloved family reread. So that just tells our parent it's a rhyming book, it's a picture book, obviously, but if people are buying online, sometimes that's a good thing to kind of put in there. It's going to become a family reread, so you better make sure you like the look of it because you're going to be reading it a lot. So those little things can be good. If it's an educational book, you can also add something, you know, like I've had one where it was teaching kids to count and also find different body parts, eyes, nose, etc., etc. So you can say, you know, this, you know, playful book helps children count to 5 and identify, you know, such and such body parts. So it's sort of information for the parent so they can make an informed decision in buying that book for their child, because parents, and let's be real, educators, school librarians, all these, you know, other people who buy books for children as well are all looking for the kind of, you know, learning goals and experiences that they are looking for kids of a particular age. So that is probably how I would write a blurb for, let's say, 90% of picture books. With ones that are more educational, I might, and like, let's say books for like, you know, 0 to 3 years where they might just really not care about the blurb as a child. You can actually sort of put something that's more like, you know, in this educational, you know, picture book, mama and baby discover X, Y, Z. Like you can actually write the blurb like that sort of to the parent rather than to the child so much, and still follow more or less that same structure of a little setup, an inciting incident, and wrapping it all up at the end. So really similar. Like I say, the Book Blurb Magic course will help you with that, but it's just less specific to picture books. But hopefully that kind of little analysis gives your listeners something to go on. And I just thought that was a hilarious example. I'd completely forgotten about it until last night, and it's a really fun little book.
It's a really great example because for me, that the way you've written that blurb totally captured the feeling of the book, spoke to the child and spoke to the parent. So it's like a triple winner. Like I don't even have kids that age anymore, but I literally want to go buy that book.
Job done. And this is it. And I think this is, again, where it's helpful to think of a blurb as sales copy, because that just means that you're then thinking, well, who am I speaking to? And it doesn't mean you have to think like a marketer. Like I used my creative writing and my sense of fun and, you know, to write that. It's not a terribly formal piece of writing. And it's still, you know, were I the author of that book, I could have written that blurb in that style and still been me, still been an author. Like that was my whole aim in writing that blurb for that author, was to capture them in that back cover copy. And it's just important to remember who you're actually speaking to and making sure that you're speaking to child and to adult and keeping their needs in mind. Like, why would this adult want to buy this book? And in this case, it's really humorous. They're not going to learn any huge life lesson necessarily from it, but it's hilarious. It's fun. It's, you know, it's got friendship in it. All of those things are things that you can highlight to, you know, an adult who's buying a book for a child, and make sure that, you know, they are, you know, excited to buy your book.
Yeah. And it's the melding of them. Like what my very first series is called Meditation Adventures for Kids. And this is before I officially became a middle grade writer. That's where I started my journey. I was writing because I used to do psychology and healing, and that was, you know, me. So I wrote, you know, Meditation Adventures for Kids. And I had this dilemma that people, because I was, you know, like the sort of healing counseling person, they all thought that it was sort of a healing counseling books, but they weren't. They were like crazy fun and adventurous, right? Like the wildest imagination stuff you've ever explored. And it was trying to make the point that, you know, you can actually, meditation doesn't have to be like, you know, floating on a cloud and breathing. Yeah. It can actually be like fun, adventure, and, the balloons to let your worries go and all sorts of things. The reason I'm telling you this is I wrote a really fun action adventure blurb. And then I must have a history of doing this, Jessie. Please don't judge me on this.
Not at all.
I then got a marketing expert who had like a lot of success with their own books to, rewrite them. And they turned really talking to the parent. And it was like, and I've left them there. And I swear to you, the sales did this.
Oh,
I haven't touched them because I've moved on from them now, but I'm going to give you these blurbs to fix for me.
Wow.
Because it was suddenly like, is your child anxious and have, problems feeling things? Then, this book will help them with that. And it became like that sort of approach. And I just didn't know what to do. Like, do I go that way? But what you're saying is we can actually meld these two kind of approaches together. We've got space in that blurb to touch on all of that, which I've learned so much from listening to you, and I'm sure the other listeners at home have too. It's just amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. And I think it's really interesting what you say about sales changing so drastically when you change a blurb, because of course your blurb is your little invisible salesperson welcoming customers to your book and being like, hi, I think you'd like this book. Why don't you buy it? And it's there working. It should be there working in the background for you when you're not busting your butt on, Instagram and everywhere else trying to promote your book. And it can really have a very big impact on sales. And it is so important to not be afraid of experimenting with your blurb. And this is the wonderful thing about self-publishing, is that you can change your blurb yourself. You don't have to rely on anybody else. You can, I also have a blurb audit package where if you've written a blurb yourself and you want help with it, come to me, we hop on the Zoom, we talk about it, we brainstorm, you get access to me on Voxer, and we can it's kind of like a one-on-one sort of coaching experience. It's a bit cheaper than having me write it for you because you are doing all of the legwork. But it's so important to be unafraid of being like, this doesn't work. Let's change it. And sometimes it's, cover, and sometimes it's keywords, and sometimes it's ads, but the blurb is just right up there, I think, with the cover as the top two things that sell your book.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Do you actually edit ones?
I do. So if you are in Book Blurb Magic, the course, you actually, in exchange for your honest feedback on the course, I actually provide a really quick free critique on your first blurb. So it's just a voice memo from me chatting through what I, love and what needs to be maybe tweaked about your blurb. But then once you're in the course for life, you actually have access to, I have 2 VIP blurb critiques, which are really affordable. I'm going to forget the prices of them now. They're about $20, $30. And so one of them is just, again, a voice memo of me. And then the other one is I'll actually give you a screen share video of me working through your blurb on Word, doing track changes, talking you through, and you get that video and the Word document with the tracked changes. So there's 2 tiers of blurbs. You only get access to that if you're in the course. And the reason I do that is because once you know the formula, it's much quicker for me to critique people's blurbs. If you're not in the course, then I've got my one-to-one blurb audit, which is a bit more pricey, but you also get much more direct access to me and much more back and forth if you really want to learn more about blurb craft from me personally. So there's all of those options, and you can find them all at bookblurbmagic.com, I should say, my website, which will be up as of when this episode goes live. It's in my brand new website, and you'll be able to see all of those services there.
That's terrific. I've been getting your emails for a while, and I've been wanting to buy the Book Blurb Magic so desperately. But as I was saying to you before we went on air, I didn't want to get it yet because I didn't want to learn and then come on and interview you and already knowing. I wanted to literally come on with my book blurb trauma and sort of experience, because,
I love that.
Because that's how, the actual listeners can learn more rather than me sort of coming on as you're the expert, and I think it's so important to say, genuinely, that it's like you said, that cover, you need to pay money for the cover. Do not make a cover yourself, people. Don't do it.
No, Canva is not good enough.
Right. Absolutely. Don't use Canva. Do not do it. I don't care how much that cover costs. Pay it, right? Yeah. It's like, for me that order goes, must pay for editing, non-negotiable, yes. Must pay for a cover. And then often I find the conversation kind of stops there.
Absolutely.
As long as you've edited, as long as you got a great cover. But as you say, like that.
The blurb is the missing piece.
The missing piece. Thank you.
Yeah, the missing piece in your marketing puzzle. And it's also, the great thing about blurbs is they make such great social media content. You know how many reels you can make? You can make a reel. I was talking to Jen over at Mixtus Media, and she was like, you can make a reel for every line of your blurb. And I was like, mind blown.
How?
Like that is so much content. Like, do a whole reel on your hook, do a whole reel on like, your opening sentence that introduces your character with like aesthetic too. Like there's so much content that you can put it in your newsletter. You can use it as an incentive for people to sign up. I've had students reach out to me and go, oh, a really big bookstagrammer got interested in my book after they read my blurb. I've got a client at the moment. I wrote her blurb. She's using it for querying. She's just sent it off to an agent today. And like, we're hearing more and more that agents are interested in having a blurb when you are querying, if you're going on a more traditional publishing route. So like it's such an important piece of the marketing puzzle. It should be an absolute, I think it's that holy trinity of like pay for editing, cover and blurb. And whether or not you paying for the blurb means you pay for the course and learn how to do it yourself, or you pay someone like me to do it for you, just a little bit of investment is going to go such a long way.
Yeah. You know what popped into my head is one time one of my blurbs, after it was written, made me recognize there was something a little bit wrong with my story. So
I have had students say that, yes.
Yeah, right. So actually then I went back and changed the story and made it better because of my blurb. So should we be writing the blurb at the very end? Or should we I don't know. What do you think?
So I know people who write the blurb first and they blow my mind and they're like, oh, it just, helps me to map out the book so much better. And then they often find that they tweak the blurb once it's done. I'm very much a fan of writing the blurb when your book is finished, like really finished, just because the focus of your book can shift ever so slightly if you change a plot point. Like sometimes I'm in the middle of a blurb and a client will be like, I actually thrown out that plot point. I'm like, whoa, that actually makes a really big difference. And so I'm a big fan of just saying, wait until your book is finished or in its final copy edit or something before you are getting that blurb written or writing it yourself. Let everything settle before you write it. However, if it helps you to write your blurb first, totally fine. And I have had students like you who write the blurb and then go, oh my God, there's an issue with the story. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to give you more work. But it's, better to discover it now than later. It's such a great focusing tool for really analyzing your story and looking at, which parts really shine.
Yeah, it really is. And my next question, bear with me, is one of my chapter book series, actually the only chapter book series I have, is written in first person. So the character Evie is, speaking, and therefore I wrote the blurbs also in her voice speaking. Is that a good or bad idea?
I love this conversation because first-person blurbs are like, I was on TikTok for a brief stint and the opinions on first-person blurbs are just like some people hate them and other people are like, we love them. So what I have learned from about first-person blurbs is that they are very acceptable and very widely used in the romance genre, and I'm talking like erotica and spice. So very, very different to what we're talking about today. However, young adults and like middle grade seems to be the next genre where it's acceptable. So romance is they're like the king of first person blurbs. That seems really, really popular. There's a lot of first person POV books in that genre and they write their blurbs and it's actually shifted the industry a bit. So traditionally third person blurbs were it. If you get traditionally published, I'd put my money on you getting a third person blurb. It's just the industry standard, regardless of the point of view that your book is in, you can always write a third person blurb. However, first person can be really fun. You need to be clear on your reasons for doing it. If you're writing a first person blurb just because you wrote the book in first person and you're like, this will be the easiest thing for me to do, I would say that's not a good enough reason. Because first person is actually a lot harder for a reader to resonate with, which sounds like counterintuitive, but it can sound like the character, walks up to you and goes, hi, I'm blah, 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 blah. And you're like, I didn't ask, go away. Why are you bothering me? So it can be really tricky to write a first person blurb that doesn't sound self-centered and actually alienates the reader. It sounds like a one-sided conversation a lot of the time. And the reader's like, you're just talking about yourself. I'm not into it. It can be done. I do address this in my Spicy Blurb Playbook course, which is very specifically for romance. So if you're writing middle grade, it's probably not going to be much use, but an interesting point and something that I am investing.
It was really interesting what you said about how I never thought of that, how when a first person going, me, can be like someone walking up to you and making it all about them.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And it can be a much less immersive experience for the reader. And that's the opposite of what we want to do. We want to immerse them in your reading experience just like that and not have to feel like they've got to work their way in. They should just be in it from the get-go.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Well, I have learned so much about writing blurbs. And, of course, as soon as I get off, I am going to go buy Blurb Magic because I was hanging to do it anyway. Now Beautiful. I can do it and actually improve my blurbs. And I know that if I'm struggling to improve my blurbs, you are available. And I really appreciate that because, as you said, sometimes those, really big professional blurb writers aren't as available. And I think it's fantastic. It's a bit like that in, I'm really into sort of personal development. But a lot of the time, the actual key person isn't available. You can't get coaching anymore. Yep. Everybody now, yes, I know courses are fantastic because everyone makes like a lot more money from them and they don't have to drain their energy, but it's still so valuable to have someone if you need them.
Yeah.
Coach you, do it for you depending what stage you're at.
And that's really important to me. Like when I built the Book Blurb Magic community, like I just really want to be there for my students and my clients as much as possible because I think that is what makes all the difference is that kind of personal presence. So I did want to also say for your listeners, if they use the code Eleanor Page, they can get a 5% discount on Book Blurb Magic. So ELENAPAIGE. And all you need to do is head to bookblurbmagic.com and head over to my products page, jump into the course there. It is $37 for lifetime access to Book Blurb Magic. So I've got authors who use that course over and over and over again. And that code will also work on my custom book blurb service as well. So I'm discounting those two services for your listeners today. So the Book Blurb Magic course and the custom book blurb service, 5% off with the code Eleanor Page, regardless of whether you want me to do it. Because sometimes people go through Book Blurb Magic and they're like, I love this. It's so good. My kid got sick. I don't have time. Please write my blurb for me. So, whatever your situation, I've got you covered.
Oh, well, that's so generous of you. And I'm assuming I can use my own code for...
You absolutely can. Absolutely. Fabulous. And if your listeners have any questions or, specific requests, just email me, jessie@bookblurbmagic.com. I'm also on Instagram @bookblurbmagic. That's where I hang out a lot of the time. So I love doing reels, posts, and I love taking requests from the community. So, and I would really like to do more content for children's book authors because I've written so many children's book blurbs kind of prior to starting Book Blurb Magic while I was still on Fiverr. And then Book Blurb Magic has been a real mix, but just not that many children's book authors yet. And I would love to work with more of you. So please hit follow. I'll follow you back. DM me. I want to connect.
Yeah, well, this is the place. It is the Children's Book Author podcast, so you wouldn't be listening to
sure
this podcast unless you're a children's book author. You might be, but, that's the main target audience. So, yeah, get onto it, people. Get blurbed. That's going to be my...
That sounds fantastic.
Get blurbed. Go get blurbed. There's no excuses you want. I mean, I've got to now go back and look over 25 book blurbs because I have 25 books. So I
do offer a bulk discount. That might be a good time to say that too. So if you need a bulk discount, email me and let me know how many blurbs you need and we'll sort that out.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much, Jessie. All of those links will be in the show notes, people. So if you didn't jot them down, don't stress. Go to the children'sbookauthorpodcast.com and you will find Jessie's interview and all those links. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, expertise, and wonderful heart on the show today, Jessie.
Thanks so much, Elena. It's been great fun.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out thechildren'sbookauthorpodcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.